In the previous video, I looked at how the PlayStation fared in video output when compared to a PlayStation, PlayStation Portable, and the PlayStation Vita. I was pretty impressed with the Vita despite the limitations of the video output software. While I was making that video, I realised that PlayStation Portable content might actually work out better due to its 16:9 support and the fact that the Vita screen is 2 times bigger and scales perfectly to the PlayStation Portable. With that, I decided to test out PlayStation Portable video output using a real PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation Vita. The PlayStation Portable will be using the OSSC at 480p Line 2X with component cables for maximum video output. Sadly, by default, the output is small on screen and will need to be scaled up to the display. Here's a before and after to show you what I mean. The Vita will be using the USB cable connected to my MacBook and will be outputting at its native resolution. Thanks to the hack, I can adjust the PlayStation Portable output using the scaling tool, and we will bump it up to 2x so that it fills the screen properly. I also disabled all bilinear options to keep the output as sharp as possible. Now, let's see which one is best for PlayStation Portable video output. Tekken 6 will be first, and I chose this game because it is a great looking game with a practice mode, so testing should be easy. On PlayStation Portable, despite having to zoom in, the image looks quite good all things considered. Yes, it could have been better, but the graphics do look good and the detail is sufficient enough to look decent on a 4K display. On the Vita, the game actually looks sharper than the PlayStation Portable with a brighter look with a bit more contrast to boot. It really pops on screen. The downside is that the 30 frames per second lock is back and the dithering is really apparent due to the increased sharpness. Still, this is very impressive and shows that the Vita has potential if the software was to improve in the future. Outrun 2006 is next, and again on PlayStation Portable it works pretty well despite the resolution taking a hit after being zoomed in. There's enough detail and it's playable on bigger displays. I wish the PlayStation Portable didn't play in a small window intentionally, it would be so much sharper. The Vita definitely has more sharpness and is clearer to look at. The colours are slightly more vivid and the highlights and contrast are again increased. We do lose the 60 frames per second playback and the dithering is strong, but it's another good showing. If only we could record at 60 frames per second rather than 30. Here's Colin McRae Rally 2005, and if you think it runs better than expected, that's because I increased the clock speed of both the PlayStation Portable and the Vita by hitting select in the XMB menu, as both my units are hacked. This is the best way to play these games outside of PlayStation Portable emulation. After looking at both, I actually prefer the PlayStation Portable for this one. Yes, the Vita is sharper, but the contrast makes the image look a bit too dark and the difference isn't sufficient enough in my opinion. I quite like the slightly softer look on the PlayStation Portable, it somehow makes the image more appealing. But of course, this is all my personal opinion, yours might differ from mine. Ridge Racer 2 is a great game, and for the PlayStation Portable it looks pretty good using its video output. The pattern should be presenting itself now. The PlayStation Portable is softer in its video output but has 60 frames per second playback, whereas the Vita is sharper with increased contrast and highlights but is locked to 30. Between the two, the difference is quite noticeable side by side and it shows how well the Vita does. This is very impressive despite some limitations. Let's see how 2D games fare using Darkstalkers, the Chaos Tower. The character select screen shows how much more detail the Vita has over the PlayStation Portable. The difference is pretty obvious when the two are side by side. Unlike the PS1 video output, I can't see any shimmer in the graphics or any misaligned graphics, thus resulting in a cleaner output. The Vita looks great with the 2D style of Darkstalkers. Only the 30 frames per second cap holds it back from achieving perfection, but it is very close. The final game I'll look at in detail is Princess Crown. This Japanese-only game was first released on the Sega Saturn before finding its way to the PlayStation Portable years later. This 2D game looks incredible and I wanted to see how it fares on both systems. It's pretty obvious going between the two, the Vita is clearly better. Sharpness, colours, contrast and highlights all look better and stand out on the Vita. The PlayStation Portable still puts in a good fight, but the Vita blows it away. The video output definitely works a lot better for the Vita when playing PlayStation Portable games. I only wish we could do more with it and that we get 60 frames per second playback instead of 30. I tried out a few more games for this video, so sit back and enjoy the montage. Let me know which of the two systems you would pick for PlayStation Portable video output. I hope you folks found this video pretty interesting. The Vita is capable of great video output for PlayStation Portable games, and a lot of them looked better using the Vita. There's still a few too many limitations to make it the ideal choice. There's no sound, at least natively, the 30 frames per second cap is annoying, and sometimes the Vita look didn't suit some of the games that I tested out. There's massive potential because when you play PlayStation Portable games on the Vita itself, they usually look brilliant with great performance, sharpness, contrast and highlights. What did you folks think of the Vita's video output quality when playing PlayStation Portable games? Would you try this out yourself? Let me know in the comments, and hopefully, I hope you all have a happy new year.